Advanced stuff, fun with profiles. Now, in PowerShell, a profile is a special kind of script. Well, actually, it's not a special kind of script. It's just a normal PowerShell script with a special file name that PowerShell knows to look for and load automatically every single time you start a new shell window. It's a way to basically just get your environment set up the way you'll want it every single time the shell loads. One of the first things I need to explain is that each hosting application in PowerShell actually supports a different profile, and they all have a common one they share. Knowing what script to put all your commands in will help you kind of gauge your environment the way you need. Once you've written a profile script, though, you can put anything in there. You can customize the PowerShell prompt, you can change colors, you can prompt for credentials, you can load modules, and those are all the types of things that I think people usually put into a profile. The point is you can do anything in there. It's just these are always going to happen every time you open a new shell. So you only put the things in a profile that you want to always be configured every time you open a new shell window. Everything we'll be covering here is the same in PowerShell version 2 and later. I'm just going to be working on my Windows 8 computer, which does have 3 installed because I like the ISE here a little better. So the first thing to understand about profile scripts is that they're not loaded by the PowerShell engine. They're loaded by the application that hosts the PowerShell engine. So as we've spoken about before, this is one of those. This is the console host, and then we can run the ISE host. So here's the difference between them. If you look at the $host variable, this is actually populated by the hosting application itself. So you can see that you're going to get a slightly different reply in these two. Let's see how much I can put these side by side. Side-by-side comparisons are good when it comes to profiles. Dang it, that little thing is hard to grab. There we go. So this one identifies itself as the Windows PowerShell ISE host. This one identifies itself as console host. Take a look at this one. You've got a variable in here called profile. And you can see that this is the host-specific script that it's going to try and load. It's going to be looking in my users folder, in my documents folder, under Windows PowerShell, and it's going to look for a file called microsoft.powershellise_profile.ps1. Ugh, all that. There's also Microsoft.PowerShell_profile. So you can see that these two hosts are going to load a different script. So those two, in other words, what's referenced in that $profile variable, that's the per user, per host profile script. Now, as you can imagine, or as you might be able to guess from that little comment that I just made, there are multiple possible profiles. You've got current user, current host. All right, that's what we just looked at. You've got current user, all hosts. So there's another one that every host well, not every Microsoft provided host application will try and load. You know, if you go grab some hosting application from somebody else, it might not do that. So the two that Microsoft give you will both load this one and this one. And then you've got all user versions of those. And these live under System32. And you get one for each host by name and then one for all hosts. Now, those two you really shouldn't be using much. You're primarily going to stick with these because the things you put into a profile script are, well, they're personal. They're not necessarily things you want to trigger on everybody. Now, there's a couple of caveats here that you've got to be aware of. When you remote, so let's say I'm on this machine, machine A, and I remote into machine B, it doesn't load profiles. So the profiles, and that's because when you remote, the hosting application is the WSMan or WSM Prov host. I got that name wrong. It's WSM Prov host. That hosting application is not the console, and it is not the ISE, and it does not load profiles. So when you remote into another computer, no profiles for you. The profiles are primarily only going to apply to you when you launch either the console or the ISE. Now, again, Other hosts, for example, Microsoft Operations Manager is capable of running PowerShell scripts. It may load completely different profiles. It may load nothing. You might go get a copy of Sapien Primal Script, which hosts PowerShell. It might load the same ones that the Microsoft console does. It might have a totally different one it loads, or it might not load anything. You have to figure out which profiles any given host is going to load. So it's different based on the application that you're using. Now, if you provide multiple scripts, multiple profile scripts, the host will load them all. It will try and load every one. Let's get this window back to full size. If you look at, is it full size? There we go. You do help about profiles. This details what all those different script file names are and the order in which it loads them. But it will load them all. So what you do kind of depends on, it depends on what you want for an experience. For example, you'll notice that when I launch a new console, because I run it as administrator, it starts in users administrator. I hate that. The ISE does the same thing. When I do a new ISE, it starts in users administrator. Not a fan. So I want both of those to behave differently, and I want them to behave consistently. So I'm going to use the current user all hosts. And I haven't shown you that file name yet, so I'm going to do it right now. Let's save this. I'm going to go to my Documents folder, Windows PowerShell. You need to make sure, by the way, that this goes into My Documents, not Public Documents. So My Documents, Windows PowerShell, and right here's where you would put either of them, but I'm going to put the one that both the console and the ISE will load, profile.ps1, and I'm just going to put cd c:\\. Save it, and that's it. So let's close this, open a new one. There we go. And see, it just runs it completely invisibly behind the hood, no ifs, ands, or buts. Now, if you've got your execution policy wrong, let's put this back to the restricted, which is where client computers default to. Now look what happens now when I try to do this. Waka waka. I can't run it because script execution is disabled. Set execution policy unrestricted. Now, another thing you can pay attention to here is when you run PowerShell itself. So when you run, so PowerShell.exe being the host application here, when you run this, you get a command line switch that lets you no profile, meaning you can override the loading of the profile. So if you've got a profile script that's causing you a problem, this is one way to get a shell window up without running that profile. So just be aware of that. Now, what else can you do in here? Well, you know what? Let's go back to the console. Oh, I love starting out at the root of the C drive. PowerShell stores, as you probably remember from previous nuggets, stores its functions in a drive called functions. Oops, didn't mean to hit tab. And in here, there is a function that is defined by the shell called prompt. So let's look at that. Get content, function drive, prompt. This actually creates the prompt. You see, here's the PS. That's the PS right there. And then it gets the current location, so C:\\, and then it puts in a caret or a little angle bracket, but it puts in more than one. And if you remember going back to debugging, when we were in debugging mode, we had two of those, and that's because it takes your nested prompt level and adds one to it, and that's how you get multiples of those when you're in a nested prompt. The rest of this is just all comments, but what it's doing is it's getting you to a link from where you can learn more about this. Well, here's the thing with a profile. You can define your own prompt function, and it will override the one that's built in. Function prompt, for example, and it's just whatever text you physically return out of here. So if I just put $, save that, exit the shell, open a new one, now I've got a $, prompt, and that's it. I mean, it's literally a $. That's probably not a great prompt. You'll see folks do stuff like this. They'll do get date, and in fact, let's go back over to the console here. Get content function prompt. They'll steal this. Copy. Oops, that wasn't a copy. That was an enter. Copy. Paste. And make sure that all winds up on one line. There we go. Notice there's even a little space at the end here. That's why when you get a prompt, you're not jammed up against that angle bracket. You've got a space in between because you have to put that in there. So when I save this now and open a shell, that's all I'm getting as a prompt. And look at why. Look at why. It's because the first thing you return from here is what becomes your prompt. And this is what confuses a lot of folks. So if you really do want a date in here, put it in the same string as a sub expression and maybe put a carriage return after it. So in the sub expression, we'll run get date. Save that, open a new one. And that might have been what you were after. Yeah, so now every new line, you'll get the current date and time. So if you like that, you can do that. What else? Oh, yeah, I've shown you this before, I think. Let's see. Host.privatedata.error foreground color equals green. Yeah? Check this out. Now errors are green. So you not only feel good about yourself because green means you did something good, it actually, I think, is a little easier to read. That red on black gets a little low contrast. I find it difficult to read on some monitors at least. So I like turning it over to the green. This makes it a little simpler. So all kinds of stuff you can do in here. Here's another cool trick. I like this. I tend to run a lot of commands that require an alternate credential. And they're almost always the same one. So right in my script here, my profile script, I will run get credential, username, lab administrator. Save. Look what happens. This is even better. So in version 3 of PowerShell and later, you can put a message. Let's do this in single quotes so it won't try to expand that $ cred. We'll just leave it as a string. So this is version 3 and later, you can put a message explaining why the heck you're prompting for this. Just so if you run this later and you're like, hey, is this asking me for a password again? You'll have some clue why. So save that, yes. Open the shell. Need admin password for $ cred. Oh, okay, sure. Now, in the shell, this is something a lot of folks don't realize. Profile scripts run in the global scope. So any variables or functions that are defined by the profile live in the global scope. And now I've got that credential. So now I can do a get WMyObject, computer name dc.lab.pri. Let's go grab its BIOS, and I can just provide that credential. And I don't have to go through the password prompting again. That becomes a reusable object that stays in the shell for the entire duration of this shell window. That's kind of cool. So it's little time-saving stuff. You could pre-import some modules if there's some modules that you run a lot. For example, if you want to always have the Active Directory module loaded, you could maybe do that. Here's another trick. I like this one. Now the syntax I'm going to use right now is version 3 syntax. You can do this same trick. We talked about it in implicit remoting. You can go back and look at that nugget if you need to. So I'm going to load a module from a remote machine. The first thing I need to do is get a session going to my domain controller. New PS session, computer name dc.lab.pri. And then I can import the module Active Directory from PS session, from that session. Right, because I don't have the Active Directory module installed locally. So now when I run this, I should get a little progress bar. Now I can ask for help. I can run all the Active Directory commands as if they were installed locally because it's actually remoting them from my domain controller, and this sets that up every single time I load the shell. It's awesome. Now, the downside here is that I do have an open session, and it eventually, depending on how I've configured remoting on that remote computer, this will eventually time out and close. So if it's something you don't do a lot, then you're going to load this, the session's going to time out, and it won't actually work if you try to use it. So, I mean, you only want to do this with things that you know you're using all the time, but it's kind of neat. I'll tell you something else, because you're just going to do all tricks. Let's say this is not something you do frequently. No, we should use the same verb, import. I'm going to create a function that will bring all those things in. And I want to have that session be usable. So because this is a profile script, this is one instance where I feel okay modifying the global scope directly. Now keep in mind, this function, although the profile runs in the global scope, this function would have its own scope. Because this is a function being created in the profile, and the purpose of the profile is to modify the global scope, I'm comfortable using this. So I'm creating my session, putting it into a global variable, and then importing that module using that session. The trick is, because this is happening in a function, it's not going to run automatically when I open the shell. It's going to wait for me to go, oh yeah, you know what? I do need those AD stuff right now. Let's run import AD module. And it all starts to happen. Now I can say help get AD user. It'll go to the domain controller, get the help, and display it here. So it's just some really, really neat little creative things you can do with profiles if you're thinking about it, to have things there, to have them available, built in, ready to go. And because of the way I've done this, because I've done this in this particular profile script, instead of one of the host-specific ones, all these little tricks are now going to be available in my entire shell session. I don't actually like my prompt that way, and I don't want it auto-loading anything. This is honestly about the only thing I usually have in my profile. It's just get me to the directory where I'm comfortable. Everything else I'll do. I'll tell you why too. When you're teaching or when you're showing someone, having stuff magically happening in the profile can be a little confusing, because then they go to their computer and they don't understand why those same things aren't there. And it's because they haven't set up the same profile. The other thing too is, if you start stacking a lot of stuff in there, it's possible to create conflicts. One module conflicts with another, and you start to get kind of bad results. Here's the thing. If you are ever having problems and you need to make sure that it's not your profile, Windows R, PowerShell.exe, yes, minus no profile. Load that up and then see if you're having the same problems. If you get a different behavior in the no profile shell from your normal console, then you know the problem has been introduced by your profile script, and you can start troubleshooting it from there. So now you understand that each different PowerShell host can load the same profile script as the rest, or its own kind of, let's call it a private profile for just that host. And in those profiles, you can do anything you want. You can change directories, you can change the prompt, set up colors to be more comfortable for you, a prompt for a credential, load modules, whatever's necessary to get your environment set up the way you want it every single time. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.